Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on good agronomic practices in tobacco production. My name is Tendai Gukuta and I am delighted to host you today. Today we're going to have an opportunity to explore vital agronomic practices that can significantly enhance the sustainability and productivity of tobacco farming. And we have the privilege of having Tendai Shirihove today as our speaker. Um, the seasoned researcher here at Kutsaga who will share her expertise and real world experiences on the good agronomic practices in tobacco production. And feel free to put in any questions in the chat box or to have any reactions. Or you can raise your hand towards the end of the presentation if you'd like an opportunity to ask Tendai a question. So I'll hand over this time to Tendai and she'll take us through her presentation.
Thank you very much, Tendai. A pleasant morning, dear growers. I'm delighted to share with you today some tips on good agronomy practices in tobacco production. As my sister already said, my name is Tendai Shirihove, an agronomist with Kutaga. Sorry, just a network glitch. So the difference between the golden leaf and the not so golden leaf is certainly what you'll hear about in this webinar. My presentation outline is as follows. We're going to take a sneak peek into seedling production, discuss land preparation and some key cultural practices. We'll take a look at crop nutrition and soil health, variety selection and tobacco growing regions, weeds, disease and pest management, topping and sucker removal, very critical in tobacco production. Then we'll look at reaping and curing. We'll bring this to a conclusion and step into the question and answer segment. Seedling production. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's very important to get it right from the start. It's very essential in tobacco production. When you start the nursery, there should be one general goal in mind. That is obtaining the ideal seedling. So, what is an ideal seedling with regard to tobacco production? It should be 12 to 15 centimeters long, 6 to 10 millimeters thick. It should be well hardened, having between 8 to 10 leaves below the buds, and most importantly, it should possess a strong, vigorous root system. Now, which better way to obtain this ideal seedling than the float tray system? Now, the float tray system has so many numerous advantages. We're talking about reduction of the seedbed area required to raise seedlings for a hectare. They're easier to pull when it comes to the time of planting. There are fewer chemicals required in fewer quantities, reduced time of pulling, superior, more uniform and drought-tolerant seedlings, well-developed root system, weed management is minimized, and there's flexibility in planting. Ultimately, the end goal is to have easier field management. And with raising float tray system seedlings, you are guaranteed of having a more uniform crop. I'm sure you can see in the background, there are those ladies clipping in the background. It's very minimal labor required in the float tray system. So dear growers, those of you who are still raising seedlings, maybe this is certainly the one you should go for if you are looking for the ideal seedling. Now, what are the pillars of good nursery management? I'm going to talk about 4 critical things that you should be wary of in nursery management. I'll talk about nutrition management, disease management, clipping, and lastly, hardening. Now, with regard to nutrition, it's very important to keep to the timeline. You should step in with hydrofed or float fed at 7 days, 21 days, and 35 days after sowing. Then at 42 days, you step in with an application of ammonium nitrate. and then you stop completely any nutrition management. You'll see why shortly. With regard to disease management, it is very important to be proactive in the float tray system. So there are general disease management chemicals that you can use. For example, at 28 days, you can use trichoderma. At 35 days, you can step in with azoxystrobin as preventative measures. And as a general guideline, sanitation is very important in nursery management. You should make sure that there's water with soap when people are walking in, no smoking in the seedbed area, and as well as a foot bath, which has like a bleach to ensure that the area is absolutely clean. With regard to clipping, as you saw in the previous slide, you saw those ladies clipping. So clipping is basically removal of parts of the leaf area, and it's very important as it regulates seedling growth. It also helps in decreasing chances of early flowering. And again, it is very important that tools used in clipping should be sterilized. Please note and note this very well. Lastly, it's important to harden your seedlings in the nursery before you transplant. Now, you may be wondering what hardening is. It is basically acclimatizing your seedlings to the field environment. And this is done in the float bed through timely application and use of nitrogen. It helps to thicken the seedling, and at the end of the day, you have a stronger seedling which is resilient to transplanting shock. So please remember these four pillars of good nursery management. Make sure that you're in check with your nutrition management, you're in check with your disease management, you're taking care of clipping, and when you're now getting ready to go to the field, make sure that you're taking hardened seedlings to the lands. Now, looking at land preparation and cultural practices. Tobacco requires soils which have a light texture. That is sandy soils to sandy loam soils. The soils should be deep and permeable, and you should certainly avoid soils prone to waterlogging. Important to note also is the time of plowing in tobacco production. Early plowing is essential before the end of the rains while soil is still moist. And the reason for this is you have lower costs, greater uniformity of land preparation, and as well as great moisture conservation. Also, there is early and uniform decomposition of organic matter. So it's very important to make sure that your time of plowing is done correctly. Moving on to ridging. For those of you who've been to tobacco plants, I'm sure you've seen that tobacco is grown on ridges. Okay, so ridging is very important because it promotes good surface drainage. It's a good environment for early crop growth, and you should ensure that the ridges are around 20 centimeters and have flat tops. Then you also have a process called re-ridging, which is important because it removes weeds in the furrow, and again, it promotes better surface drainage and helps to prevent root exposure. Ridge spacing, it will differ in irrigated and early planting as well as late planting. With irrigated planting, with a recommendation of 125 centimeters, and late plantings 115 centimeters. And as of the time of planting tobacco, the irrigated crop, the early irrigated crop, you can start planting it 1 September, and the rain-fed crop from 1 October to mid-November. You should note and note very well that no tobacco should be grown in the period 15 May to 31 August. Optimal plant spacing in tobacco production is a must. We see that with close planting, there's reduction in size of plants and individual leaves. You end up having thinner tobacco and lighter bodied leaves with lower nicotine content. Wide spacings, on the other hand, increase proportion of the heavy bodied leaf grades. The average spacing is 1.2 meters between the ridges and 0.5 meters between the plants. Now, this is a pictorial representation of planting, and it shows basically the critical stages when it comes to planting tobacco. So the first thing, oh, you have the ridges already in the lands. The first thing that you should step in to do is what is called holing out. Holing out is done by our normal badza. As you can see on the PowerPoint presentation, holing out has already been done. When holing out has been done, the next thing to do is filling the holes with water. The idea behind this is to make sure that there is enough water for the tobacco when it's transplanted, and also to achieve link up to subsurface water. Pesticides can also be added to planting whole water. So it's very important to make sure that you fill the holes. After filling the holes, you can see that lady now, she's planting. There's a special hole required for planting the seedling. After planting the seedling, we see a pesticide being applied directly into the planting water to ensure that it is absorbed by the seedling. After that, you then cover with the topsoil, and that also acts as a mulch. So this is the pictorial explanation of how planting is done with regard to tobacco. Then irrigation. Irrigation is sometimes necessary in tobacco production, and these are the critical stages where irrigation is used. So there's pre-irrigation, and it's like uniformly wetting the soil before ridging. This ensures that ridging is done effectively. Then we also have what is called settling in irrigation, and it is most useful where a herbicide is to be used. Some herbicides will need that settling in irrigation to be activated. We also have irrigation scheduling from 4 to 5 weeks, that is for the irrigated crop. No irrigation is required until 4 weeks after planting and 5 weeks after planting for fast and slow growing areas, respectively. Another critical thing to consider with tobacco are rotations. Why is it important to rotate in tobacco production? Firstly, it helps to maintain or improve soil fertility. It also helps to minimize soil erosion. And most importantly, rotations are very useful in suppressing harmful nematodes. So in some cases, you just cannot resist to continuously grow tobacco because it is, after all, the golden leaf. However, there are disadvantages with this. Continuous tobacco production results in increased nematode and disease incidence, loss of organic matter, reduction in water holding capacity and infiltration rates. Soil structure also deteriorates, and there is increased soil acidification. And the result of this, almost inevitable. You have short stalks, small thin leaves, and poorly expanded leaves. And you know what that speaks to? It speaks to poor quality tobacco, and definitely no gold to talk about. Moving on to crop nutrition and soil health. There are some key considerations when you're talking about tobacco crop nutrition. I cannot overemphasize the need for a well-planned nutrition program, and this should be based on soil testing. Gone are the days where people would step in with blanket recommendations. How do you know, for instance, how acidic your soil is? What if all the fertilizer you're applying is going to be just logged in because your soils are low in acidity? You cannot get a good crop without soil testing. I cannot overemphasize this. From soil testing, you can get fertilizer recommendations as well as soil health recommendations. Let's say if your soil has poor microbial activity, these soil analysis can pick all that. So basically, when we're talking about tobacco nutrition, we cannot move away from the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship. It's important to ensure that you have the right source, the right rates, the right time, and the right place. I'll repeat that again. The right source, the right rate. Remember, you're getting this from the fertilizer recommendations, right time, sticking on to the recommendations from agronomic practices, and also ensuring that the fertilizer is placed at the right place. So, this is just another pictorial representation of how to place fertilizers in tobacco production. With regard to basal fertilizer application, you can do double bending, as you can see on the picture on your left. And with regard to top dressing, we use the method called dolloping. Again, the fertilizer is dolloped on either side of the plant as seen on the picture. Before moving on to the next set, it's very important that we talk about soil health in tobacco production. Soil health in tobacco production is critical for maintaining crop quality and sustainability. Tobacco plants are heavy nutrient feeders, depleting soil of essential nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Continuous tobacco cultivation without proper soil management can lead to soil degradation, reduced fertility, and unfortunately, increased vulnerability to pests and diseases. To mitigate these effects, farmers should implement practices such as crop rotation, the use of organic fertilizers, organic amendments to replenish soil nutrients and improve soil structure. Maintaining healthy soil is essential for sustaining long term tobacco production and, most importantly, reducing environmental impacts. Now, it's very important for you to consider the variety that you're going to grow, linking it up to the tobacco growing area. When it comes to the choice of cultivars, there are lots of things that you should consider. The area, the time of planting, the rate of ripening, root knot nematode resistance, and yield and cured leaf style. So the tobacco growing areas of Zimbabwe are shown on the map that I've shown. So there are slow growing areas, the ones marked in green. And in these areas, you can plant all varieties, but it is key to avoid late planting of slow ripening varieties, such as KRK 28 and KRK 29. The area shaded yellow is the medium growing area. You can grow all varieties. For the fast growing areas shaded in red, it's important that you avoid KM10 and its hybrids, all the ones listed there. Then as Kutsaga, we have developed new drought-tolerant varieties, T78, T79, T80, and T81. And these can be grown in the blue shaded area, which are the marginal areas. And results are showing that these are doing very well in these areas. There's no way we can talk about good agronomy practices and not talk about weeds, pest, and disease management. When it comes to pest and disease management, it is very important to take a closer look at what is called integrated pest and disease management in tobacco. Now, integrated pest and disease management involves the use of a combination of many different methods, from cultural, mechanical, as well as chemical strategies to control pests and diseases. Very important to minimize harm to the environment and human health. Key practices include crop rotation, the agronomic practices there, shaded in purple, the use of resistant tobacco varieties, proper field sanitation. It is also very important to use pesticides judiciously, and this should be guided by monitoring pest populations to reduce chemical dependency. This approach enhances sustainability by preventing pest resistance, secondly, reducing input costs, and thirdly, maintaining the ecological balance essential for healthy crop production. So, this diagram just shows the critical stages in the integrated pest and disease management in tobacco. Special emphasis is again on agronomic practices. A pictorial example of other methods that can be used within the integrated pest management. During planting, you can put pesticides in the planting water as depicted by that picture. And as well, when you finish planting, you can put a preventative chemical like lambda to prevent cutworms. This is very essential in tobacco production because remember, we want to keep our plant population high and not compromise our yield due to reduced population. It is also very important as a grower to go into your field scouting for pests and diseases. If you see any diseases, you can therefore determine the threshold levels. If there's need to rogue, as on the picture on the right, you then rogue out diseased plants to ensure that there's no continuous spread in the lands. Now that's a very bad picture on the right. I hope that there are no growers who leave weeds to such an extent. So weeds are very competitive in nature. They compete with our tobacco plants for light, for nutrients, for water. They are very competitive. And they may harbor pests and diseases. It is very crucial to control weeds early. And in this, it is also very important to be able to identify weeds. So the control of weeds depends on the type of weeds, the weed pressure, and even the age of the weeds and the plants. So problem weeds you encounter in tobacco production include nut sedges all the way to barnyard grasses. So in whatever chemical controls you decide to use, it is important that you use TRB registered herbicides, pesticides, and insecticides. So if you're going to step in with herbicides, there are pre-emergent herbicides such as clomazone, sulfentrazone, and there are post-emergent herbicides such as halosafuron. Mechanical weeding can also be done, especially when you've controlled your weeds effectively during the early growth stages. Nematodes are a headache in tobacco production, but fortunately, there are very successful ways of controlling nematodes. It is important to note that control of nematodes is important both in the leads and in the seedbeds. In the lands, a very effective way is rotation using resistant grasses such as our Catambora grasses. It is also necessary in some cases to apply fumigants in the lands such as 1.3D and EDB. Transplanting should be done at least 14 days after fumigation. This is very important and may you kindly note this. Kutsaga has also developed some root knot nematode resistant cultivars. It is very important to make use of these in the fight against nematodes so that you ensure that your yield is not compromised and you can have that golden leaf. Topping and sucker removal is very important in tobacco production. I know the term topping is usually used for top dressing in other crops, but in tobacco, you're going to see that it's something completely different. Now, topping is the removal of the terminal buds. It is very important to top tobacco as it influences the crop yield as well as the grade composition. Why should you top? It increases the mass and size of the leaf. It helps to alter the chemical composition and, most importantly, allows maximum leaf expansion. So, topping can be done from 18 to 20 leaves, which is roughly between 8 to 10 weeks after planting. So, the tobacco crop, in reaction to topping, the most immediate reaction is going to develop suckers because in its DNA, it wants to reproduce and complete its life cycle. So suckers are going to be produced by the plant. It is very important, this topping, because there's a 1% yield reduction for each day delay in topping. Also, there will be lower nicotine content and increased susceptibility to white mold. So it is very essential that tobacco is topped and topped at the right time. So as I alluded to in the previous slide, the reaction of the tobacco plant to topping is production of suckers. So the next agronomic practice I'm going to talk about is sucker control. Complete sucker control is crucial. And suckerside application is the best way to do this, and this is done after topping. However, there may be need to hand sucker, pardon me, there may be need to remove suckers using your hand if they are greater than 2 centimeters. How do you apply the suckerside? It is poured over the top, over the recently topped plants, and you should ensure that it is running down the stalk. It is also important to ensure that there is no damage to the top leaves. Examples of suckercides which can be used for sucker control are products with decanol, which have been approved by Kutaga, and this is a contact material, as well as flumetrolene, which is a systematic suckercide. Now, moving over to reaping and curing. This is the final lap when it comes to tobacco production. Very crucial. Now, reaping is basically removing ripe leaves. So, timing of reaping is very crucial. Reaping should be done when there is slight yellowing and puckering between the veins. The pictures on the slide show an example of a ripe leaf. As a guideline, 2 leaves are removed per week. Please be very careful to make sure that the tobacco leaves do not become overripe. And please don't be in a hurry that you remove the leaves while they are still green. The problem with taking overripe leaves is that they will not color well during curing. And when you harvest the leaf when it is still green, you have a pale color, harsh texture, and chemical balance in the cured leaf. All this results in one thing: a poor quality leaf and a poor price for your priced leaf. The next thing I'm going to talk about is curing. So during curing, there are complex chemical changes that occur. Curing is basically coloring of the tobacco leaf as well as drying. It is important to note, dear grower, that 75% of the market value of your leaf when you come to the time when you go to the floors is based on the color. And with regard to drying, rapid drying is essential. Please note that too much temperature at too high a moisture hits the leaf. So it's very important to make sure that the temperature and the humidity is under check during curing. Otherwise, you end up having spongy leaf. And you know what that means: no money in your pockets, or very little money. So, to bring this to a conclusion, as Kutaga, we are carrying out continuous research, contract research, where we are evaluating herbicides from new sources, pesticides, biostimulates, organic stimulants, organic fertilizers, to ensure that the grower will only use things that actually work in tobacco. We do not want to increase your production costs using products which will not help improve either your yield or your quality. So we do rigorous testing of all new products to ensure that we are making sure that anything that we recommend as Kutaga will increase your productivity and your sustainability. We are Kutaga anyway, for productivity and for sustainability. We are also carrying out fundamental research where we are seeking to answer all the important questions. What happens to the fertilizers we use? What's their impact on greenhouse gas emissions? What happens if you're going to use our stocks for biochar, etc.? Does it matter the source of the water you're using in the flow trays? All those questions we are seeking to answer in the fundamental research that we are doing here at Kataga. Last but definitely not least, it's very important you know that from this presentation, a lot of herbicides are used, sarcicides, pesticides. It is very important that we ensure that the people who handle all these pesticides always wear protective clothing so that we safeguard their health from the use of these chemicals. So you cannot be a good grower if you are not ensuring that your farm workers have protective clothing and as well that you are using products which are greener. A lot of greener, for example, nematicides have been registered of late. So it is very important to ensure that you are taking care of safety, of health, and as well as the environment in tobacco production. Ultimately, tobacco yield and quality are heavily hinged on agronomic decisions made by the grower. So please, dear grower, ensure that you implement all these tips that we have shared today in ensuring that your tobacco production remains productive or becomes productive while at the same time being sustainable. I thank you for your time and attention. Over to you, Tendi.
Thank you, Tendai, for such an enlightening presentation. I see in our chat box we've got questions that have been put in. Um, the first one is from Trimo Badza. At rotation, what are the plants that can be included in the rotation? And then I will read all of them, and then Tendai can address them one at a time. We also have Dadiraj Nam will also be assisting in taking questions. We've got one more question on in the nursery. What are the most problematic insect pests and what are the chemicals that are recommended in the seed bed? In addition to that, how many times and at what intervals is one supposed to be spraying both preventative fungicides and insecticides? All right. So I'll hand over this time to Tendai and Dadirai to address the questions.
Well, thank you very much for the questions. So the first question is at rotation, what are the plants that can be included in the rotation? So the most famous one definitely is Katambura grass, GHR1. We also have other crops such as sun hemp, wheat, groundnuts, and maize. Thank you. For the next question on nursery, I'll hand over to Daddy Rai.
Okay. Good morning to you all. Thank you for that question. So I think maybe some of you did attend or some did not manage to attend the webinar that we had on insect pests in the float tray system. So we had that webinar and we actually have another dear grower which was sent out regards that. But to answer your question, the most problematic insect pests that we have seen in the float tray system, we are talking about your fungus gnat, which is a problem in the early stages when the seedlings have not covered the media in terms of the foliage. So that is one of the pests that we have seen. There's also the challenge of pythium root rot. But all these can be taken care of if we follow the recommendations of applying the required chemicals such as your ridomil at 35 days after sowing. That is for the pythium root rot, and also the use of the trichoderma, our T77 strain, which is very effective in terms of boosting the immune system of the seedling and also increasing beneficial microbes in the seedbed, such that your seedling will be able to fight off all these diseases effectively. So this is an encouragement to all those who are doing the flow tray system to take on this trichoderma so that you may reduce the use of chemicals in your seedbed. Thank you so much. And in terms of the presentation, yes, it will be shared. This whole presentation will be shared on our social media sites, the YouTube, on our Facebook, and also on LinkedIn and many other platforms. Those will be shared. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Tendai Hove. Thank you, that right Namo, for those responses and contributions. So this at this point we are going to close off our webinar. And thank you to all the participants for taking part, and we hope to see you on our next webinar and engage further. Thank you.